This is the regular meeting of the Kaneland Board of Education. We'd like to inform all board meeting attendees that this meeting is being live streamed and archived for access at any time by our community members on the internet within 24 to 48 hours of the meeting's conclusion. And please stand with me and recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Witt.
Here.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Here.
Mrs. Junk. Here. Mr. Carey.
Present.
Dr. Lawler.
Here.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Here.
Mrs. Simmons.
You're like that kid in elementary school. Okay. With 7 members present, we do have a quorum. Is there anything that a board member would like to move from consent to new business? Okay, hearing none. We do have a couple of things we need to add to the agenda tonight. We need to add 2 closed session topics. So in addition to 2C21, we also need to do 2C1, which is employment compensation, and discipline, and then we need 2C9, which is a student disciplinary case. So we're adding 2 additional closed session topics. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved. Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mrs. Junk. Aye. Mr. Carey. Dr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons. Aye. Mrs. Witt.
Aye. Motion carries 7-0. Okay, we come now to board and superintendent salutes, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Lee.
Yes, thank you. We do have one tonight, and because of Mrs. Eggleston as being the primary organizer and manager of this event from our district, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Eggleston, and Fran, I'll let you share the highlight.
I'm here tonight to share a big shout out to the Elburn Lions. On January 7th, the Elburn Lions hosted a matinee movie at the Sycamore Library for our students with disabilities and their families. And while it's their first annual one, they plan on continuing it. It did start off very small. There weren't very many students and families that attended, but we look forward to growing this and appreciate the Elburn Lions and all that they've worked on behalf of our students. Both myself and Dr. Layden had the honor to serve alongside these wonderful people, and it was a privilege. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Fran.
Thank you, Elburn Lions.
Thank you. That was all we had. We have 3 or 4 at our next board meeting, so we look forward to January 30th to share additional salutes to our Board of Education.
Excellent. Dr. Fuchs, anything from you? No. All right. Thank you. Board members, no? Okay. So tonight's consent agenda contains the following action items: the approval of the treasurer's report from December 2022, the approval of accounts payable December 2022, the approval of minutes of the December 12th, 2022 regular meeting, the approval of personnel, the approval of the destruction of audio recordings from closed session meetings from July 2021, the approval of school fees for 2023, 2024, the approval of 2021-2022 audit reports for Kaneland and Fox Valley Career Center, and the following informational items: the second quarter budget update, field trip notifications, the Freedom of Information Act or FOIA report, and student suspension data report. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended, or as presented. Sorry, got my
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mrs. Junk.
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Not consent. Aye.
Dr. Lawler.
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons. Aye. Mrs. Witt.
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. This is the first opportunity for public comment, and I don't think we have anyone signed up. There was another opportunity at the end of the meeting. Are there any public comments that anyone would like to make at this time? once, going twice. No signups, right, Julie?
No.
Okay. So we will move on. The first item then under new business is the presentation and approval of the bond funding options for the April referendum.
Yes, thank you. As you know, we have a guest here tonight, but I will turn it over to Dr. Fuchs, and she can talk us through the beginning part of the memo and then assistance with Bob, and we can start. So thank you, Dr. Fuchs.
Very good. Our guest tonight is Bob Lewis from PMA. PMA has served the district for many years, both financially in terms of bonds and refunding and selling, as well as cash management and investments. So I'm gonna run the slideshow and Bob's gonna do his presentation, but let me just share with you a little bit of why tonight. As we prepare for the April 4th referendum, we need to decide, the board needs to decide if the referendum passes and we begin to do our projects and sell the bonds, we'll need to decide how to structure those bonds. Structuring the bonds is similar to a mortgage, but we have a lot more flexibility. With a mortgage, when you go out, say for example, you get a 15-year mortgage, the bank will give you an amortization schedule and tell you how you're going to pay that. With a bond, when we sell them, we get to pick how we want to pay it back. We can put a lot up front, we can put a lot in the back, we can spread it out even, and that's what Bob's going to show you what your options are. Our Finance Advisory Committee, who no longer reports to the board but to the Administration Advisory Committee, met in December and looked at two of the options for tonight. They asked that a third option be presented, so Bob has prepared that for the board. He'll talk through each of the options, and we do have a recommendation for the board. So I'll move over there and Bob can come up to the microphone. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me here tonight, and thank you for always putting me right at the beginning of the agenda. Not every district does that. And thank you, Julianne, for setting that up with the mortgage analogy. That was a really good one, and because we're all familiar with home mortgages and car payments and the lack of flexibility you have on how those are repaid. And with bonds, you do have some flexibility to amortize things that helps to meet certain objectives that you might have. And we're going to go over those objectives a little later in the presentation. And a couple of terms just to remind you or refresh you, or maybe these are the first time you've heard these terms. When I use the term debt service in the presentation, debt service refers to your principal and your interest payments. And then as a reminder, your bond payments are paid from a separate levy. So when you extend your taxes to your taxpayers, you have commonly what we call just the operating funds, which consists of ed, O&M, transportation, so on and so forth. And that's used for a variety of different expenditures. Then you have a separate bond levy as part of that extension, and those dollars collected for the bond levy can only be used to pay the bonds. And the authority to extend the tax only exists as long as the bonds exist. When bonds are retired or they go down in payment, then that extension falls. You have no ability to extend it without permission of the voters. So why don't you go ahead and advance one more slide and a couple of,
You
yes.
said something there that made me think. So we issue 20-year bonds. We can't refinance them 5 years from now to another 20-year.
Well, you could.
But then you said we can't change the term.
Well, you can't reissue for like another purpose. You know, for example, if you were at a point where you're paying off all your debt, and then you have a new project you want to finance, you can't go out and issue bonds to finance that new project without permission of the voters to do so, is what I was referring to.
Okay.
You can always refinance and extend the bonds. That's probably not a wise thing to do, but yeah, but you could if you wanted to.
So where the 57 million is all that we're authorized, but we can restructure that for the next 100 years if we wanted to. Not that I'm suggesting.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Each financing is always limited to a payback of 20 years, but it always starts over the next time around. Good questions. And oftentimes that's a misconception, is why I gave you that introduction, because as individuals, we know if we're paying off our car, we can use that money for another car payment. We could free it up to use it within our monthly budget. We don't have to go back to our employer and say, hey, do you mind if I take that $500 and stop paying, I pay off my car and use it for something else? But you have to do that. If your bonds mature, you have to go back to the taxpayers and ask for permission. So the key assumptions is we assume that bonds would be issued a couple months after a successful referendum in April, if it is successful, and that we use current market conditions plus a 0.5% when we calculated these. Now, since we did these calculations, we've seen improvement in the municipal bond market this month, so there's probably maybe another 0.15, 0.2% built into this analysis. So it's a little more conservative than what's being shown there on that slide. So we're providing, as Julianne said, 3 different scenarios for your consideration. And the blue bars represent your current payment structure, which consists of, I believe it's payments on 5 different bond issues. Let me just verify that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different bond issues. And they come together to make this overall payment structure. See how your blue bars are flat? That's something that you worked several years to achieve. Your bond payments were going up annually. We did some refinancing to lower the payments by lowering the interest rate. There was no extension of the term when you did those refinancings. You just lowered the payments by reducing the interest rate and took advantage of those market conditions we've had over the last few years. So you now have a level overall payment that collectively consists of those 6 bond issues. So in this scenario, we structured the proposed new bonds as a level debt service scenario. So that means the payment in year 1 of principal and interest is the same as the payment in year 20. Just like your home mortgage, there's more interest in the first year than principal, more principal than interest in the last year. And with this one, you'll see I have a summary a little later in the presentation. The benefit of this, if you will, is that for a 20-year term, this has the lowest total payback in terms of principal and interest. The drawback of this one is it has a higher initial increase. The green is higher those first 5 years. You can think of, in all these scenarios, we've created what we affectionately call a drop-off after year 5, where your payment drops off. And so in some sense, you can think of those first 5 years almost being like a surcharge on the tax bill, because when you get to the 5th year, your taxpayers are going to see a decline in their bond payments. Now, that decline in your bond payments would mean a corresponding reduction to the tax bill in that year, but it also gives you flexibility to not only have a reduction in the tax bill, but if there's another need that comes up that needs to be financed, that may be a good time to consider it, because you could do it at the same time the bill would be going down anyhow. It'd be like having a $750 car payment and going out and buying a new car, maybe only has a $500 car payment, and you still see $250 coming back to your budget. So it's kind of one of those win-win scenarios a few years down the road. Now, the amount of that drop-off is going to vary on the scenarios too. This scenario has the largest drop-off from the last year, the blue payments, to the subsequent year. So we're always trying to balance out the initial increase, how much you're paying back, and how big the drop-off is. All 3 scenarios have different outcomes there, which we all summarize on one slide. So you don't have to remember all these differences as I'm going through. We'll talk about them all together in the summary. The next page, and I apologize for you, those of you in the crowd that have the smaller numbers, this is just a detail that funnels into the prior graph. So the yellow line represents your current levy year. Those were the taxes just paid last year. Levy year 22 and after represent taxes that are going to be paid this summer and fall, and then the subsequent summers and fall. And you can see those 6 outstanding bond series there. The 2004 series, I'm not counting that one because you'll be paying that one off in 2 weeks. But the other 6 that are remaining there make up the dark blue bars on the prior graph. And then the light blue column represents the proposed new bond payments. So you can see, in order to net the $57.5 million, the total principal and interest payback is just under $90 million. It's a type, now, nobody likes to pay interest, But if you ever looked up your home mortgage, when you first enter into a 30-year mortgage, you're paying back more interest, or maybe as low as rates were, maybe not more interest, but you're paying back probably somewhere around 1.5 to 1.75 of what you originally borrowed, or 150% to 175% is what I was trying to say. So I always like to look at that ratio. You like to see that at 150% or so, the amount of payback to what you borrowed. And the next scenario, this is what we call a wraparound scenario. So this is when your flexibility comes in. The prior scenario was level debt service, same payment in the beginning as the end, just like if you had a car payment or a mortgage. The payment doesn't change. Here's where the flexibility you have comes into play for issuing bonds, where you can see in the first 5 years, the green bar height is actually lower. So there's some principal amortized in those years, but most of the principal is retired in levy years 28 through 41. The thought being, have the bulk of the principal amortize after all the other bonds have matured, because the benefit of that is it's a lower initial impact to the taxpayer for those first 5 years of the so-called surcharge. But the consequence of deferring the principal it means you're going to pay back more principal and interest than you would in scenario 1. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the total payback in the scenario at the bottom of the blue column is $95.3 million. So it's about a $5 million more payback in order to have a lower initial impact to the taxpayer. Now, this one, has a smaller drop off too. In my opinion, in all three of the scenarios, the drop off from the last year of your current bond payment to the next year is pretty significant, regardless of the scenario. To me, that's the lesser of the three variables you're trying to balance is that drop off, because it's going to be a pretty large number, whatever way you slice it. So the third scenario tries to blend together the first two scenarios, where we minimize the initial payment for the first 5 years, but we try to dial back the payback by shortening the term of the bonds. State school code allows you to go out a maximum of 20 years, and the first two scenarios went out those 20 years. In this scenario, we're only going out 17 years. So that by shortening the payback, you can have a smaller initial impact to the taxpayer, but keep the amount of total debt service that's retired to something similar to what you see in scenario 1. So if you go to the next slide, Julianne, you'll see at the bottom of the blue column, your total payback is around $89 million. So it's very close to what you see in scenario 1. So in summary then, if you go to slide 10, in all three scenarios, the estimated interest rate, and remember we've built into this a 0.5% cushion, plus, like I mentioned earlier, there's probably a little bit more. So with the cushion, you're right around 4.5%. If you're actually able to sell these today, you would be sub 4%, which from a historical perspective still sounds like a good interest rate. Not as good as you would have had the last couple of years, but still from a longer term historical perspective, a 4% or lower rate would generally have been considered very good. So the estimated total debt service, first scenario is just under 90 million. The second one has the highest payback at 95 million. And then the third one with the shortened payback to 17 years is right around that 89 million. It's really, I consider scenario 1 and 3 almost a wash on the total payback. I know it's $1 million difference, but that could easily come out to about the same depending on what market conditions are at the time. Now, so what's the bond and interest impact, that initial increase for the first 5 years? That's in the third row. So in scenario 1, your bond and interest tax rate would be estimated to go up 48 cents. And the reason that's an estimate is because until the bonds are sold, until you know your EAV for the summer, you have to estimate what that increase would be, but it'd be roughly 48 cents. For your median home, and that median home value comes from the American Community Survey put out by the Census Bureau. Different agencies might have different median home values. Zillow might have something different, but this comes from the Census Bureau. So for the first scenario, it's $411. For the second scenario, the tax rate increase is around 29 cents, just like the third scenario was just 29 cents. So the initial increase to the taxpayer is lower there at $250. So that fifth line there gets to that so-called drop-off. Remember I said everything was going to vary by the impact of the taxpayer, the amount of payback on debt service, and then that delta in levy year 28. The first scenario has the biggest decline. The second scenario is a $9.3 million decline, and the shortened payback is at 8.2. And like I said during my presentation, all three of them have a pretty significant decline. So that, to me, that's the lesser of the three variables.
And this popped into my head, so I'm sure I'm not the only one that's gonna think of this. How come we can get bond rates, you're saying at like 4-ish%, and mortgages, I think they said today were 6.7?
Because municipal bonds, one, couple reasons. One, as a school district, you're a much better credit than we are as individuals. You know, you're rated AA by Standard & Poor's. Two, the bonds are issued as being tax exempt. What that means is when you pay interest to your investors, the interest that you pay to them, they don't have to claim that interest on their taxes under the United States tax code. So they're getting you are getting an implicit subsidy from the federal government because your investors don't have to pay taxes. So that's roughly, if you look at an individual taxpayer, you know, the biggest purchasers of these are more high income individuals. The marginal tax rate is like, what, 38% now? So their after-tax return is the interest rate divided by 1 minus the marginal tax rate. So their after-tax return, even though you're borrowing at 4%, their after-tax return is probably 5.5%, 5.75% is how the math would come out.
And one follow-up.
Sure.
With the home, I forget, they say like if your rates drop 0.5%, it's worth refinancing. Is there like kind of a magic, if bond rates drop this much, it's worth refinancing?
Yeah,
Generally.
There's another variable that comes into play for municipal bonds that we actually took advantage of the last few years when we were refinancing. But to answer the first part of your question, it's generally 0.75%, give or take, depending upon the size of your bond issue and the number of payments you have left. You know, if you have a bond issue with like 4 payments left, you're not going to save as much if you have a bond issue with 10 payments left. But one key difference between mortgages and bonds, where the analogy can break down, is us as individuals can refinance our home mortgage at any time we want to. So people that are having to do home mortgages this year, hopefully in a couple years, will be able to refinance them. With municipal bonds, there's a period of time which you can't refinance them until you get to the call date, which is usually about 9 years afterwards. So like when we refinanced bonds it's been a while now, but maybe 2 years ago.
2016 essentially, and 2 years in a row we did it,
Okay.
and we saved a ton of money, 7 million.
Yeah, it was substantial, yes.
Yeah,
It was substantial.
and we did it those years because that's when we obtained the call dates for those bonds.
Sorry, one more follow-up.
No, that's fine.
So we're locked into whatever we get for 9 years, the
Yes.
interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So that final summary thing just tells you the final year of repayment, 2043 for the first two, 2040. So then choosing what to do, it's up to you then as a board to determine what factors are most important. Again, I think the lesser of the three factors is the delta in that 1 year. And then it's the taxpayer impact, you know, because, you know, ideally we'd be in a situation needing to do this project when you're about ready to pay off your old bonds. You know, that's the ideal situation for you and your taxpayers. Well, you're not quite there yet. So we're trying to balance out in these scenarios, knowing that for 5 years we're going to have to pay a higher payment until the old bonds are paid off. Can we minimize that impact to your taxpayers during that period of time? And that's what scenario 1 and scenario 3 does. What I like about scenario 3, though, is that by shortening the term from 20 years to 17 years, it allows you to keep the total debt service payback similar to what you have in scenario 1 with the higher taxpayer impact. Now, under most circumstances, you might not want to shorten the term, because by shortening the term, all other things being considered, like if you were doing this in a vacuum, no other bond issues, that means your taxpayer is going to pay more every year for the term of that bond issue. It's just like us as individuals. When you enter into a home mortgage, when we've all loved to have done our first home mortgage at 15 years, but we couldn't have, okay? You couldn't fit in your monthly budget. So we usually did our first one at 30 years. And then hopefully at some point you can refinance and shorten the term. And so those are the same type of decision points that we face as homeowners that you face as a board presenting these options to your taxpayers. And I don't know if you want to interject now with your administration's recommendation, or are you going to wait till I'm completely done?
I'll wait.
Okay.
You can, because then you can go over market things and we can,
Okay.
yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the limit to how much debt we can carry?
Yeah, that's a good question. Your debt limit, and that's slide 15, Julianne, in the
Oh,
appendix.
sorry. If you're getting it to it later, that's fine.
No, I put in the appendix in case a question like that came up. I wasn't planning to cover it, but I wanted to be prepared if you had it. And I again apologize for the size of the numbers for those people in the crowd. But your debt limit as a unit district is 13.8% of your equalized assessed value. And so that first column of numbers, you can see your equalized assessed value is 992 million. And that includes the equalized assessed value of any TIF districts that you might have,
Okay.
which you don't have much, so it's not a big change for you. So you take 992 million, multiply that 13.8%, you come up with $137 million gross amount. So that's like your gross limit on your credit card. And then you subtract the amount of principal outstanding, and that's at the right above there. It says direct debt at the end of the period. That's $54 million. So that's like what you have on your credit cards bill right now. So you subtract those two, you subtract the 54 from the 136, you come up with a net debt margin of $82.7 million. So this financing that you're considering fits within that legal debt margin of 82.7 million. And then over time, the reason why we show 4 different years here is so you can see how this number changes as your EAV grows and as you pay down principal. So in just 4 short years, that 82 million grows to 121 million. So it doesn't stay static. It changes as you retire debt and as your tax base grows.
Okay.
So we won't have to do the waiver that we had talked about.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering more about, would we be able to carry, how long would it take before we could carry the field house?
Oh.
If that was something, because we talked about that being something we wanted to do in the not too distant future. Sorry.
Oh,
So
that's
I
fine.
wanted to know,
Yeah, so if you did the field house, let's say you timed it to when your other bonds paid off, for example, by then you're looking at probably 130 million if you go like 4 years out from here, 5 years out. And you subtract, if you borrowed this money, 130 million, subtract 55, you're at 80 million roughly. Yeah, plenty of capacity.
plenty of room. Okay.
Yeah. And it hasn't always been this way. If you may recall, after the Great Recession, your AV, like everyone else's EAV, went down quite a lot, and you had just built a lot of schools, so you actually were negative at one point in time on this calculation, and it's improved tremendously because you worked hard to retire debt, and your EAV has recovered. I think it's recovered to the point it's its highest ever. It's recovered from the Great Recession.
Yeah, this year I think it's gonna hit $1 billion,
Yeah.
in March, when we get our final number. I think it's gonna be the first time it's gonna go over $1 billion.
So if I can just jump up then to slide 12. This is the market update I will do. And what you see on this graph is 2 different data sets. The gray area represents the federal funds rate, and the lines represent an index called the MMD, which stands for Municipal Market Data Index. And it's something that we use in the municipal bond industry, like the equity markets use the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrials to monitor what trends are taking place in the equity markets. It's not meant to state exactly where you might borrow, but it gives us an idea where the overall municipal bond market is trending. Because this is a market basket of AAA rated bonds from across the country. And it's not just like a local area AAA, like a Hinsdale School District, for example. It's your state level AAAs, your city level AAAs that go into this index. So local borrowers will borrow at a rate above this index, and it depends upon your own individual credit, market conditions. You would probably be, half to 3/4% above the index, depending on the term of the payment. So what you can see here on this index, I'm only going back to 2020 because I was trying to keep us focused on recent interest rates. If I had my data sets that went back 20 and I have another graphic that goes back 30, you would see that the current interest rates are sort of at the midpoint of the last 20 years, and they're around the below the midpoint if you looked at 30 years worth of this data. Now, at the left-hand side of this chart, you can see that the index shot up very quickly and then came down very quickly. That was when the pandemic hit. Everything in the economy just shut down right across the world, including the muni bond market. I think for a 2-week period of time, like 5 bond issues sold in the nation. Just nothing like that had ever happened before. The market recovered quickly, though, because of the unprecedented stimulus by the federal government, in Congress, and by the Fed, with lowering interest rates, creating borrowing programs for municipal issuers for the first time ever. And then things got into late 2020 and 21. We hit all-time lows in these indices, like all-time lows, not talking about this short period of time, but in the history of the index, they've never been that low. And for most of 21, just fluctuated up and down a bit. And then at the end of 21, we came back from the holidays, first week of January, and these indices started going up and just seemingly never stopped. It's just like interest rates across the economy, because everybody started worrying about inflation and what the Fed was going to do. And obviously you can see by the gray area, the Fed was very active last year, raising the Fed funds rate at a historical pace. Now, we have seen some improvement here lately, and that improvement is because we've had at the time I did this chart, it was 2 consecutive positive CPI reports, positive in the sense that they came in below expectations. Since I put together this presentation, sent over to Julianne, we had another report on CPI, and it met expectations. So you could see towards the end of last year, all those lines started to bend upward again. Well, if I had this updated through today, those lines would have bent back downward to they were at that sort of regional peak it's not peak, but trial that we saw in December. So we've seen some improvement in interest rates as a result of this good news that we've seen on CPI. Now, I'm always asked, well, what do you think interest rates are going to be 3, 4, 5 months from now? I don't know if it's a flippant answer, but my answer is if I could answer that question, I wouldn't be here right now because I would make money predicting interest rates. A lot of it's going to have, the market's already sort of baked in the expectation that towards the end of this year or next year, the Fed will pivot and start lowering some of its rates. That could mean that we only see the short-term rates come down. Medium long-term rates stay the same because the Fed exerts its most control over the short-term rates. Something I heard about today is because the Chinese economies are recovering much more quickly from their COVID experience, that could put more upward pressure on fuel prices again. And of course, fuel prices lead to inflation. So while we're all expecting inflation to hopefully trend downward and come under control, there are some potential headwinds in that narrative of inflation coming under control. So that's why we're careful in putting together these scenarios, because you wouldn't be able to issue bonds for a few months from now to build in that cushion. Hopefully that cushion, which was 0.5%, now is hopefully expanded to 0.75%, is more than enough so that if the bonds are sold, if you're successful, you'll be able to report back to your taxpayers that, hey, we did better than we anticipated when we put this information out to you. So that's my presentation. I can go ahead and take any more questions that the board might have.
Dr. Fuchs, you want to come back to the mic too, so that way we answer questions that I can hear it on the audio.
Yes, I do have a question.
Just one.
Maybe, we'll see.
Sorry.
All right, so would you go to any timeline slide, please, just so we have the scenario, any scenario? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't.
I can go back and do it. Okay.
I'm sorry, Julianne. All right, so my question is, if we a timeline, one of the that one, fine. All right, so if the referendum passes in April, And then we issue, when would we actually sign on the dotted line that we owe 57 million and get it? So I guess my question is, are we a year off and all that by the time we get the money, and it's only 4 years of higher taxes for if we choose that option versus the 5?
Well, in this scenario, we did sort of from the standpoint of making sure that we would cover any decision to potentially issue sooner than later. We've assumed that you would issue right around July 1st of this year. The reason being is it takes 60 days to clear all your legal hurdles because there's 21 days for the county to canvass and certify the results. And then there's 30 more days for somebody to challenge those results. So you can't really close on any bond issue until 2 months after at the earliest. So,
But we won't have plans back from an architect and engineer by then to do anything. So why would we issue the debt before we need the money and push things?
yeah, the good question. One of the reasons is to manage interest rate risk. One of the things that most often when I talk to boards are concerned about is meeting the pledge to the taxpayers. So by selling the bonds when you can, you lock in that interest rate, you meet your pledge to the taxpayer. Secondly, in this environment that we find ourselves in where short-term investment rates are very strong, you can actually earn your bond yield on your investments, offsetting the interest costs that you'd be paying on that bond issue. In prior times, you would issue the bonds, and while that money, you're waiting to use the money, it's sitting there making 0.25% or less. So those are two variables that come into play. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to sell it soon. We want to have the board to have the flexibility to decide when it might sell, regardless of whether you would sell this summer or you sold in January of 24, or you're always going to, you would have to wait a whole nother year to cut that from 5 years to a 4-year impact with the levy cycle.
So if we didn't go to the market, or however you phrase it correctly, till January 1st of next year, wouldn't that shorten that chart by 1 year of higher?
No, you would still hit levy year 23, because when you issue bonds, your investors want to be paid interest within 6 to 12 months afterwards. Because you pay interest every 6 months. So if you issued in January, you'd be paying interest either on July 1st of 24 or January 1st of 25, and that would come from taxes that you collected in calendar year 24, which is levy year 23, which is what you're seeing in the chart.
I got lost somewhere in there. So if we don't issue the bonds till 24, we would have raised our tax rate already in 23 to cover.
You wouldn't raise it in 23. It'd be levy year 23 collected in 2024.
So if we didn't issue to next year, because I don't feel like we'd be year 23 wouldn't have the candle. It'd just be flat as same as year 21, 22, and 21.
Yeah, remember, these are levy years, so the collection of the taxes are the following year. So levy year 23, our taxes collected in 24 to make bond payments in 24 and 25.
Still lost.
Okay.
If we don't actually issue the bonds till 23, we don't let
24,
24. I'm sorry, I misspoke. If we don't get there till January 1st of 24, taxes don't go up till.
No, because with bonds, you can change your bond levy up to March 1st of that year. So unlike your operating levy, which has to be in place by December, whatever, of 23, your bond levy can change up to March 1st of 24. So if you issue bonds in early 24, your bond investors are expecting to be paid an interest payment either on July 1st of 24 or January 1st of 25.
I get that part of it.
Okay.
But when do my taxes go up?
The summer and September bills of 2024.
So then this candle on year 23 doesn't apply.
Yes, it does, because that's levy year 23, which are taxes collected in 2024.
So
Okay.
the levy that we just did in December,
Right.
that's for fiscal year 24.
Yeah, that's
Right.
levy year 22, which you just did in December is levy year 22, collected in 2023 for 2024 fiscal year.
So we
So-
would start charging on the tax bills in 23, even though,
Not 23.
Be 24.
Levy year 23. It starts charging in September of 24.
so then the candle on year 23 on this chart doesn't apply.
No, because
For
this
my
is-
tax bill purposes, my taxes won't go up in 23.
yeah, but this isn't tax payment 23. This is levy year 23, tax payment year 24.
Okay. I'm lost, but you're saying those 5 years are still gonna be high no matter when we issue the bonds?
Unless you wait to July 1st of 24.
Okay, fine, that answers it, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so whenever you're talking about years for whether it's operating or debt, because taxes are always collected in arrears. So when you pay taxes next year in 2020, or when you're paying taxes this summer in 23, you're really paying it for levy year 22. The value of your home assessed this year in levy year 22, you pay those taxes in arrears 1 year later in 23. So with the bond payments, when it says levy year 23 here, that is your property values assessed as of levy year 23 collected in 2024. It's the most difficult concept I ever had when I'm trying to train a new analyst
No.
for this stuff.
It's fine, thank you.
I want to add to that. And remember when that happens, that cycle, I have a chart in my tax levy presentation. What CPI are you using from what year in that example? So it's fiscal year 24, levy year 23, CPI year 22. Yeah, so there's 3 years that are affected just by that levy. It is.
So if you have normally what happens after a successful referendum, you have the plan, you have your public communication, and then we refine things and come back to the board and say, okay, this is what it looks like if you issue now. This is what it looks like if you issue 6 months from now. This is what you can earn in investments if you're issuing now. This is what you could earn. What sort of interest rate risk are you taking? And then we help you balance that against your construction draw schedule because they're tax exempt, like I talked about earlier, the IRS requires you to have a reasonable expectation to spend 85% of those proceeds within 3 years of issuance. So the construction draw schedule, all that kind of comes together to make a much larger presentation to give to the board if there's a successful referendum, and then all those timing conversations can happen then. But this is more conservative from the standpoint of what the tax impact could be if the board wants to sell sooner than July 1st of 24.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Questions? Everybody good?
So the administrative recommendation, based on the information on the summary of financing, is the shortened wraparound. It provides the lowest true interest cost, so that's important for our taxpayers. It has the lowest impact on their tax bill. And additionally, it's paid off 3 years sooner than the other 20-year wraparound. So for us, that makes the most sense. Bob, I believe that was your recommendation as well?
Yeah, I thought that made the most sense of balancing out those 3 variables.
I'm gonna ask what some may perceive to be as a dumb question, but what's the biggest drawback to the shortened wraparound? Because on paper, this looks to be far and above the best option.
Yeah, the variable that is least flexible is the one about the drop off. So the year after your final payment. So if you, can I go back a couple seconds?
Sure. Please.
It's a less, shorter drop off.
So the drop off again is that final year of your dark blue payments. That's your outstanding bonds. That delta from the height of the green bar before the drop off to the year after the drop off is the smallest for this scenario. Now, the point I was making in the presentation is, while that drop off is the smallest, it's still $8.2 million. It's very significant decrease. It's large enough that the decline should give you the flexibility to lower taxpayers' bills, and at the same time, if you need to go to a referendum for something else, be able to do a referendum for something else as well. So you're giving up some flexibility in that drop off, but I don't think the give up is that large that it makes this one a not an attractive option.
So in this one, it'd be, what in my mental calculator, we're saving a few $1 million on interest charges by shaving 3 years off.
Yeah, compared to option 2, right?
Or, well, it's.
What was the number you?
It's $1 million cheaper than option 1.
Oh yeah, it's $1 million cheaper than option 1. It's $6.5 million cheaper than option 2.
So if we're asking taxpayers for 57 million, we probably should, in my opinion, use the cheapest option in interest charges and save that $1 million in charges. Just my 2 cents worth.
I think if the time were shortened considerably, I think I would have a little bit of a trouble, because when you're doing things like this that benefit students for years, you kind of want to spread it out across the tax bills of people. You know, you don't want to pay it too soon, but this is only 3 years, so
Right.
it's not, you know.
Yeah, and that was failed to mention that too. That was one of the things that we talked about with the committee, is the equity of not having today's taxpayers bear the biggest brunt of the impact of this, and by not shortening it too much, you are spreading it over current and future taxpayers who are all going to benefit from this
Yeah.
project.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe it's just the way I think about it, but you know, if I'm already used to paying that hike in the tax bill, then I'm going to be fine later, right? Money in the future is not as worth as much as money is today, right? So
Right.
like I'm used to paying that, and it goes a little bit down later. It's a win-win for me. I think that's how I think about it. So
And the impact immediately is the lowest.
right.
Yeah.
And so then we can, in the information for the referendum, we can use the lower tax increase.
That's right.
And there's a higher possibility of it passing.
Yeah.
So,
Indeed.
Say that again for me, please.
so since there's a lower impact on the tax rate, we can put that in the information to pass the referendum.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard. So what interest rate do we use? Because you said that it's down 0.5%.
We won't use the interest rate. We'll use the estimate of $244 on approximately $280,000
But that's
home.
that includes an interest rate.
Yeah, that's factored in a rate of 4.37,
The one at the top there.
which would be below 4% if it were sold today. So, which means your taxpayer impact would be less than 244.
I guess what I'm asking is, why don't we use a reasonable but cheaper interest rate number so that number becomes even smaller?
You certainly could. Most boards are wanting us to be somewhat conservative, so after the bonds are sold, you go back and say, hey, instead of 244, it was 233, versus saying, tell them it's 233 and ending up at 244. It's
Okay.
a balancing act.
Okay.
And the other thing that we can produce, we haven't done that yet, Julie, yet,
No.
because this scenario has been chosen. We
Right.
create a tax payment impact calculator, convert it to HTML that you can host on your website, where somebody can pull up their bill from last year, type in their own home value, and get an estimate of what their individual impact will be.
And E.O. Sullivan has talked to them about getting that ready for the website. That's gonna be one of the links, so that every homeowner can do exactly what
Yeah.
Bob said.
And then if you qualify for, all homeowners are going to qualify for the homeowner's exemption, but if you're a senior or a veteran, you'll be able to select those two and in the calculator.
Okay. Other questions? We good? So if there are no further questions, I'll entertain a motion that the Board of Education directs the administration to work with PMA to plan for a shortened wraparound structure of the bonds should the referendum pass in April of 2023.
So moved.
Second.
Thanks for being here tonight, the weather's yucky.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so who second, Meg or Bob?
Sure.
Bob, okay. Okay, and a roll call, please.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Dr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mr. Mankowski,
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk. Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much.
Say that again, Bob. No cabs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Talk about the FAC that I'd like to mention is none of the bonds, including plan of finance or capital appreciation bonds or cabs that don't pay interest to maturity. These are all current interest bonds that pay interest every 6 months. So that means you're going to have a lower interest rate and also less interest costs than if we incorporate some cabs. So I know, sorry, I forgot.
That's okay. But we do have FAC members who are opposed to cabs, as well as myself, in the sense of you shouldn't be doing them. They're expensive, but sometimes you have to, because our portfolio of outstanding bonds does include some, but it just depends on what your financial position is at the time you sell. And currently, we don't need to do that, and so I'm thankful.
Great.
So,
Thank you very much.
see you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll move on to J2, which is the approval of the timeline for the request for proposal for auditing services.
Yep, I'll turn that right over to Dr. Fuchs and walk us through that, Dr. Fuchs, please.
Yep. What I'd like to do, with your permission, is to let you know that the next two agenda items are very similar. So I'll do the first one in depth, and then I'll abbreviate the second one.
Okay.
They're very similar because it's two, services that the board uses, the auditing services and the health insurance broker. A few years back, the board directed me to start, doing like a bid, but it's called a request for proposal for these two services. When you do professional services, you have a little bit more flexibility because you do not have to take the lowest bid. You interview the different firms that you want to interview, and you can base the criteria on other factors. And so I put together the bid specs for these that include those other factors. The proposals will still come in unopened, and we will pick from the calendar a date that works where board members, I'm looking for one or two for both services. It doesn't have to be the same person, but we do want the same person to screen the proposals and interview the firms. So one or two people for auditing, one or two people for the health insurance broker. For that. I need to get the ad in the newspaper. We'll do that. That'll make it available on January 26th. We'll give them about 3 weeks in which to get their proposals submitted, due in February 16th. The week of February 16th to 23rd, we'll pick a date and a time where you can come in, review the proposals. I'll have a rubric where you can put point values on different criteria. We'll figure out from the submissions which 2 or 3 companies that we want to interview. And then I have 2 dates, March 1, and it should say, or March 7th.
On both?
Yes,
Okay.
You're gonna do,
March 1 or March 7th.
So is the March 2 a typo?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
you're gonna do both services in the same day?
No, we'll do auditing on one of them, March 1 or March 7th, and then health services on one of them. Those are the 2 available dates. We are squeezing them in between board meetings and referendum informational sessions. So the calendar is pretty full this year.
Dr. Fuchs, do you want the board member to be able to go to all of these dates?
No.
Okay.
So let me, I'll tell you 1 second.
Yeah.
And then after the interviews, we'll have the board approve the contract done tentatively on March 13th.
Okay, sorry.
So when do we need board members? During the week of February 16 to 23, we'll ask you to come in and grade screen the proposals.
Can that be just like anytime the board member that signs up is available, they can drop in during that week?
Yes.
Okay, that's like an open house kind of thing.
Yeah, we'll have them ready for you. Then
Cookies. No.
2 people who want to do the auditors need to decide if you want to do auditing on March 1st or March 7th. And then similarly, when we get to the next item, 1 or 2 board members will screen the health care broker during that same week and then pick the opposite night of the auditing one.
Okay. I have a question. Adam, are you the health?
Yeah.
Is it beneficial to have someone who's been there the whole time be the person? I am not committing you to this.
Well, I was just about to say that I'd like to be a part of the audit, but given that I've been involved with the health insurance committee,
I think it would be
volunteer for that
valuable
aspect,
to have your knowledge of that committee and the way it works
sure.
help with the broker selection.
Yep.
So, and then if one other person wants to, 1 or 2 is sufficient. For the health insurance committee, we'll pick myself, Barb Bradford, our benefits coordinator, Patty Reeder, KEA person that co-chairs with me, somebody from Speak. There are 2 we'll pick from. So that'll be the committee that does that one. For the auditors, and Dr. Layton also for health insurance. For the auditors, we'll do myself, 1 or 2 board members, Dr. Layton, and Judy Van Bogart, my assistant, who prepares much of the work when the auditors are coming. So you won't be alone. So that's why 1 or 2 board members is appropriate.
Now, for the interviews, it's possible to be scheduled after hours? Is that
They
what
will
you
be.
do? Okay.
Yep, we'll start them in the evenings.
Okay.
And we'll usually do 2 or 3 firms or vendors, depending on how the proposals come in.
That's what the screening
Yes.
portion will determine.
Yeah.
Should we approve them before we decide who goes?
No, I think we can do it either way.
Okay.
I was just gonna mention that we have the other thing on the 8th or the 9th.
Yes.
So I don't,
It's a busy,
can't-
busy time.
so I can't do either. Yeah.
Either night. The other.
The 8th or 9th for the
Yes.
other one, but I don't want to add this on to
Yeah,
that.
that's fine.
I will volunteer to do the auditor one if somebody, but if somebody really wants to, I'll let them have my seat. That's fine.
I mean,
If
there
I
can be
remember,
two.
Ryan, didn't you do it last time?
I did.
So you're familiar with the process then.
I think I was the other person on the
I
last
think
time.
so
but
too.
Not saying I wanted to do it.
I also did the auditor.
Oh, that's right.
I did health insurance last time.
Okay.
What are you volunteering?
I know, I'm
for?
like, I don't know.
Jennifer.
Fit me in.
So you can put 2 on either one.
Yeah. So I've got Ryan for auditing.
Jennifer,
I can join.
you work
Yeah.
you work in healthcare, right?
Yes, I do.
Ready to go to the healthcare
Wouldn't that be helpful?
Yes, I spent the last 25 years of my life doing it, but yeah. Either
Unless
one.
you're like, oh, no, I don't want to hear about that again. No.
No, I'm good. Wherever is best needed. Obviously, there's certain like.
Well, count me. I assume that you guys were going to count me in for health insurance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, consider
So
me.
it's Jennifer and Adam then.
Okay, Jennifer and Adam. Okay, and does anybody else want to help with the auditors?
I would have helped with health insurance, but I'm not helping.
Okay. Bob will? Okay, Bob volunteered for that one.
You can arm wrestle Jennifer for it. Okay. I'm teasing.
So Ryan and Bob, I'll be in touch as we get closer and need some things. So no worries. And then also, I just want to mention for both services, currently, we're very happy with the companies that are serving us. So we won't be excluding based on current performance. They both do a really nice job. So,
And that's a great point. We're bringing this because the board had asked for a regular couple-year rotation and not out of concerns for current service.
yeah,
And again, you do it on best value, not lowest cost.
that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think then we can go ahead with
Okay.
the recommendation.
Yep.
And, for the auditor,
Yeah, so the first one, looking for a motion that the Board of Education approves the RFP timeline above to select an auditing firm.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Dr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky,
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk,
Aye.
Mr. Carey.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. And then, motion that the Board of Education approves the RFP timeline to select a health insurance broker for
So
the
moved.
district.
Second.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mr. Mankivsky,
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Dr. Lawler.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
thank you very much.
Moving on to J4, the approval of donations for Fox Valley Career Center.
Yep, because the amount, the total, being over the $500, based on our policy, we bring it to our Board of Education. So, Dr. Fuchs, I don't know if there were specifics you wanted to share on any of the donations, but I'll let you share an update on those.
Thank you. I think just the total amount for this year has been impressive for Fox Valley Career Center. They've done a nice job seeking donations and getting them. And so the total is $90,767. And I know that the administration and staff are very grateful for the individuals, companies, departments, and recommend that the board approve them. The two that are 400 and 417 maybe didn't need to appear, but because we're putting all of them on there, I think it's just really generous of our community.
What does W.S. Darley Company do? The ones that donated the $60,000?
I believe that they specialize in this hazmat kind
Oh,
of equipment
okay.
and supplies.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was that or if they
Yeah.
were a company that used them and had extras, you know, or something, and so they gave them, kind of like the others do. Okay.
Thank you,
Well,
everyone.
Yeah, it's very generous of everyone. So, looking for a motion that the Board of Education accepts the donations to the Fox Valley Career Center in the amount of $90,767 to be used in the classrooms at the center.
So moved. Second.
And a roll call.
Mrs. Simmons,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk,
Aye.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Dr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. So, give me a second here, please. So that concludes new business, and we are on superintendent and board report.
Yes, thank you. Next Thursday night, the 26th of January, we have our quarterly CAC meeting, and the agenda, no menu, no food, but the agenda, we'll send out that Monday in advance, because we do have a couple topics that are required that we meet with a parent group, and we've used CAC for years for this agenda item. We have our special education handbook that Mrs. Exton will be there to present. Dr. Mumm and Mr. Raleigh both will be there for the indicators of success, as we shared when we presented that and shared some of those highlights along with the school report card back in December. One of the things we talked about was looking at the indicators of success that we've used now for 4 or 5 years. It's time to update those, look at those, and we've taken those through that parent committee, and then also looked at administratively, and then with the board for discussion too. And then the last piece is also another required piece, which is the discipline handbook. So we'll make sure that we have both the discipline handbook and the special education handbook in the hands of our CAC members at the beginning of next week, so they have time to review it before the meeting. And then the expectation is give us any feedback, any changes, how are things going, or any questions that they might have. The other piece, one of the other ones, legislative update. as you know, with session, back in session after the lame duck has ended, we have had over 1,000 new bills already submitted in this legislative session. And typically, education impacted legislation is anywhere between 35 to 45% of those bills. So there are already hundreds that are into the queue that will have an impact on education. So we are monitoring those and looking at those, and those that have more of a direct impact to the district, I'll bring with regular highlights between now and any time that there would be action on those bills. So I will share those regularly. Also, we championed the ROE compliance visit this year. As you know, they have representatives that come in December. They come into the district office and sit there for a couple days as we share all of our compliance modules, as we share all of the requirements that we have to be in compliance on an annual basis. So it is regularly looking at curriculum, it's looking at dates and timelines, areas that we need to update, and we always have one or two. This year we have 4 that are out of compliance, and they're only out of compliance because the curriculum renewal cycle will take place this summer that will address those. So those 4 that we have, we just note the ROE looks for a correct active correction plan, then we'll submit the correction plan, and then we will then take care of that for next school year. Also the spelling bee, another obligation last night with our Board of Education, but otherwise we love to attend the spelling bee. That was last night, and on the 30th we will, January 30th, we'll have recognition and a salute for our hard workers that put on the spelling bees both in the building and the district-wide spelling bee. Then the last thing I have is a referendum update. We are in the process of finalizing our information that we're going to send, the dates when we're going to have open house meetings, and also we're working with our administrative teams to come up with dates and times and meetings to share with small groups, big groups, civic groups, PTAs, PTOs, sports boosters, all of those. So we're getting all of those dates on the calendar. So Dr. Fuchs and I and Dr. Horn and Mr. Rollman can host a series of those events. There will be some virtual, there will be some in person, so that way we can communicate. We're also putting together brochures and flyers, as Dr. Fuchs mentioned earlier. Jen Hodek is in the process of updating our website to make sure the information that we saw earlier on the tax piece, as well as drawings, diagrams, other information that we have that we can keep readily updated so that information can be accessible to all of our users. So we're in the middle of that process, and I do know that on the other side, the referendum committee has had one meeting with the group that they're working with, and I'm just going to look for an update there, and I'll share any updates that I have with that group too. But again, that group is aside from all the information sharing that we do in the district.
What size of a group it is? Do they have, did they get significant?
Not yet. They're still looking to build that. I think they're at about 5 right now, and so they're still looking to add that. So if anybody's interested, please again forward them to me, and then I can forward them on to that group so they can communicate.
From that group reviewing the information that you all are putting together, so they can give you feedback from the community side saying, like, maybe you should word it this way, or maybe you should think about this.
Yes, we will work interactively as much as we can without crossing any of the information advocacy boundaries.
Okay.
Yes, for sure. Those are my updates. Thank you.
Todd, can you, I know as administration, what you can and can't do in terms of referendum. As board members, what is our limitation?
Yeah, great question. When you're acting as a board member, you could only do the information side. Anytime outside of your active duty as a Board of Education member, you can work with the advocacy group all you'd like.
Okay.
You're welcome. Thank you. Dr. Fuchs, anything?
I don't believe so.
Lindsay's turn.
Oh, yes, sorry, Lindsay. This afternoon, I forgot already.
Get into the curriculum things again.
Dr. Fuchs, is that why you're staring at me? Like, don't forget, Lindsay.
No, it was, did you ask me to do one and I can't remember what?
No.
It's blank on the minutes.
So that wasn't a question.
Do you want me to have?
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank
All
you,
right,
Lindsay.
so kind of on a lighter note. So let's give you guys a brief update of the high school and everything that's going on. So basically for sports, our teams worked hard over break. We all got a break, but they keep going. So for boys varsity basketball, some big wins that they've had in these past couple of weeks have been against LaSalle Peru, Johnsburg, Plano, Mendota, Yorkville Christian, Morris, Sycamore, Stillman Valley, Sandwich, and then last night against Rochelle. And then the boys' next upcoming home game will be on Saturday the 21st against LaSalle Peru. And then currently the team is 17-4 and 8-0 in conference, making them first in Interstate 8. And then for the girls' varsity basketball team, some big wins that they've had have been against Plano, Mateo Valley, and Lamont. And the team is currently 9-9 overall and 5-2 in conference, making them fourth in Interstate 8. And then they also have a home game at Saturday the 21st against LaSalle Peru. So that'll be like a boys-girls kind of thing this Saturday. So it should be really fun. And then for our wrestling team, they have had a lot of wins lately. Some of these schools have been against Lane Technical, Lake Park, Hoffman Estates, Maine East, Wabansie Valley, Sandwich, Oswego East, Nequa Valley, Crystal Lake, Highland Park, and Genoa Kingston. And then for our bowling teams, yeah, they've had a lot. Our boys bowling just competed at the regional tournament, and they placed 8th overall at this. And then the girls bowling last night just beat Ottawa at their little meet. And then for fine arts, we have some cool stuff coming up. This weekend actually is our winter play. This is called Puffs, and it's basically a spin-off based off of Harry Potter. And since the auditorium has construction right now, this is going to be in the Black Box Theater, so it's kind of more of a personalized viewing, which I think should be cool. And so if you're interested in getting tickets to this, I would get them soon because they will sell out faster. And opening night will be on Friday. And then KWP, which is our Kaneland Winter Percussion, they have been practicing in full spring since like probably the beginning of December. And their first performance will be February 12th at Plainfield Central High School. So that again is up the road a little bit, but I mean, they're amazing. And also this has been like a couple years without having it. So we have a lot of kids doing it this year. And then finally, our winter band concert is coming up February 2nd at 7 p.m. And since our auditorium is having construction done, this is going to be at the NIU Performance Hall. And that will also be a first for us. And it's a really, really nice facility. So everyone is looking forward to that. And then for clubs, once again, Student Council is planning a big winter dance. And they're working really hard on that. And so we actually haven't done this. We've done Winterfest in the past. But this will be something new this year. So we're hoping to get a lot of attraction with that. And then a reminder, I don't know if you guys knew, but this week the middle schoolers are coming to the high school. All the little 8th graders are coming in. National Honor Society and Key Club are in charge of giving them tours of the school. And then they also, in the library, do a Q&A session with all the students to make sure all their questions are answered and they kind of feel at ease before the big jump next year. But yeah, that's all I got for tonight. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thank you.
You know, Lindsay, thank you for that. And also, Lindsay reminded me that for the 21st on Saturday, in addition to the basketball doubleheader, the boys-girl doubleheader, that's also the Hall of Fame, the winter 25th anniversary recognition. So we have an invite out to our Hall of Fame inductees, those that have been inducted over the years. We do have 20 or 30 that will be there, so we'll recognize them. And also a couple of the induction ceremonies will take place then that we had put on hold during COVID. So that'll be during, I think it's 5:30 or 6:30 between the two games. We'll be doing that induction at the East Gym at the Kaneland High School for our Hall of Fame. Thank you to to Bob Mankivsky for serving on the Hall of Fame committee as we determine some of those times and venues. So thank you.
Anything from anyone else? Are we good? All right. Topics for future agendas. Anyone have anything that's burning? Okay. Public comments. Do we have any sign? No. Are there any public comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move forward. We do have A closed session tonight, and we're going into closed session to discuss under the Opening Meetings Act, Section 2C21, 2C1, and 2C9. There's no action expected after we come back into open session, so after the vote to go into closed session, the recording of tonight's meeting will be concluded. So I'm looking for a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call, please.
Mr. Carey,
Aye.
Dr. Lawler,
Aye.
Mr. Mankivsky,
Aye.
Mrs. Simmons,
Aye.
Mrs. Witt,
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Aye.
Mrs. Junk.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0.
Are we staying here or moving?